fast, where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to row-wide facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast. If you're a dairy producer who thinks immigration raids only target criminals, you're about to get a reality check that could save your operation from financial disaster. Today, we're diving deep into the labor crisis that's about to crash the dairy industry. We're talking about data that shows 51% of your milking crew could vanish overnight, potentially triggering a 90% spike in milk prices. This isn't political theater. It's cold, hard economics that every dairy operator needs to understand. You've invested millions in your parlor, optimized your genetics for component premiums, and fine-tuned your nutrition programs. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Without immigrant workers who milk 79% of America's dairy cows, all those investments become worthless overnight. So grab your coffee, because we're about to challenge everything you think you know about workforce stability in dairy farming. This episode could be the difference between adapting to survive or watching your operation become another casualty of policies that ignore economic reality. Let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into a topic that hits right at the core of every dairy operation: labor. Specifically, the increasingly volatile situation around immigrant labor and what it really means for your farm, your balance sheet, and, well, even the price of milk on the shelf.
That's right.
We've got a critical article from the Bullvine in front of us, and it pulls absolutely no punches about the reality of the situation.
It really doesn't. And look, this isn't about wading into political rhetoric, right? This is about confronting these stark economic and operational realities that are laid out with real precision in this piece.
Yeah.
The Bullvine article puts a potential scenario on the table that might sound, well, unbelievable at first glance. A projected 90.4% milk price hike.
Which just sounds massive.
It does. But the power of the article is really how it meticulously walks you through the data, showing you why this isn't just some sensational headline. It's presented as a potential, maybe even probable consequence tied directly and mathematically to the stability of the labor force that is currently milking the vast majority of America's cows.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive today. To go through the details presented in this specific Bullvine article, understanding the harsh realities it describes regarding the dairy labor crisis. Its deep and frankly undeniable connection to immigration policy and what this could fundamentally mean for your operation.
Yeah.
Regardless of its size, its level of technology, or how sophisticated your genetic program might be, it really zeroes in on that operational impact.
The stakes, as the article makes abundantly clear, couldn't really be higher for the industry. It doesn't shy away from talking about the potential for, operational collapse on individual farms.
Right.
The very real threat of farms being forced completely out of business, and the strong suggestion that the future of milk production in America, like on a national scale, is inextricably linked to this specific issue.
Yeah, an issue that maybe many might prefer not to confront directly, perhaps because of its complexity or, political sensitivity.
Exactly. But the article forces that confrontation based on operational facts.
So let's dive right in, following the path the article lays out. It starts with what it calls an undeniable reality, a core assertion that once you see the numbers, becomes absolutely fundamental to understanding the root of this entire potential crisis.
It goes straight to the heart of the matter. The dairy industry's fundamental, deep-seated dependency on immigrant labor.
Yeah.
It frames this workforce not as, supplementary, but as the primary engine room, the essential foundation upon which current U.S. milk production is built.
And the numbers it cites from researchers like those at Texas A&M University's Center for North American Studies, they're not just large, they're absolutely massive.
Huge.
It states that immigrant workers milked 79% of America's dairy cows.
79%.
Think about that for a second. Truly picture it on a national scale. Nearly 4 out of every 5 cows producing milk in the entire United States are being milked by immigrant workers.
Staggering when you put it like that. That's not a niche workforce. That's the mainstream. That is the workforce.
And extending beyond just the milking parlor itself, looking at the entire farm workforce, the article states that immigrants make up 51% of all dairy labor across the country.
More than half.
More than half. That's the entire workforce dedicated to dairy farming, from feeding crews and herd health to maintenance and field work.
Right. These aren't marginal percentages that you could just, easily backfill somehow. These are dominant foundational figures in the labor pool that keeps farms running day in and day out.
And the direct threat, as the article frames it, comes squarely from immigration crackdowns and what it refers to as political theater. Essentially, the policy shifts, the enforcement actions, the rhetoric coming out of Washington that directly threaten the availability and stability of this absolutely essential workforce.
The concern highlighted is the potential for a significant portion of this workforce to, quote, vanish overnight.
Yeah, that phrase really jumps out.
It does. And in the context of dairy, which, as you know better than anyone, is a relentless 365-day-a-year, twice daily operation that doesn't take weekends, holidays, or snow days off.
Never stops.
The implications of losing a significant chunk of your labor pool instantaneously are, well, truly devastating. There's just no pause button on a dairy farm. The work must continue.
The article uses a really effective analogy, I thought, to drive home why this labor dependency is so fundamental to the very operation of a dairy farm.
Yeah, it does.
It compares the reliance on this labor force to other practices you would just never compromise on, stating it's as fundamental to your operation as maintaining proper dry matter intake, DMI, or monitoring somatic cell counts, SCC.
It's a perfect and powerful parallel for anyone in dairy, isn't it? Just as you would never consider feeding your herd half the required ration of a carefully balanced TMR and expect them to maintain peak lactation curves, udder health, and optimal production because you understand the biological necessity of DMI.
Right.
The article argues that the U.S. simply cannot logically expect to continue producing 79% of its milk supply while simultaneously engaging in policy actions that threaten to remove the very workers who are essential to performing the physical tasks required for that production.
So it's not just abstract policy debate happening somewhere else.
Not at all. It's a direct, immediate impact on the operational reality, the biological reality of the cows, and the economic reality of the vast majority of dairy farms in this country.
It really forces you to confront the core question the article is posing to every producer. Are you genuinely prepared for what happens on your farm when political theater in Washington inevitably collides head-on with the economic and operational reality in your milking parlor, in your barns, and in your fields?
Yeah, because the article suggests that collision point isn't hypothetical. It's becoming, increasingly likely.
Because that's where the impact is felt, not on cable news, but right there on the ground, where the work gets done.
Exactly. Where the cows are milked, the feed is mixed, the calves are cared for, the equipment is maintained. That's the front line.
And the article paints this vivid, almost alarming scenario of what that collision looks like right there in the milking parlor that you've probably invested so heavily in. Mm-hmm. Imagine your investment. Maybe it's that brand new state-of-the-art rotary parlor you just finished installing.
Yeah.
Maybe it cost you $2.5 million or more, just like the example mentioned in the article. You put that in for efficiency, for throughput, to improve cow flow.
Or think about all the progress you've made genetically. You've invested years, maybe decades, pushing your herd's genetic merit, focusing on those valuable component premiums. Butterfat climbing consistently to 4.4 ear percent, protein hitting 3.40%, driving those pounds of components that are absolutely critical for profitability in the competitive market forecasted for 2025 and beyond.
The article delivers a brutal, almost heartbreaking conclusion to that scenario. It suggests that if you were to lose a significant portion of your milking crew, using this stark example of 60% vanishing due to an enforcement action,
60% gone.
That multi-million-dollar parlor, that pinnacle of efficiency you invested in, becomes nothing more, according to the article, than an expensive monument to poor workforce planning.
Oof. Yeah, that phrase carries significant emotional and financial weight, doesn't it?
It really does.
The idea that your primary asset, your largest single investment, could become effectively useless, just sitting idle because the people needed to run it are suddenly gone.
It profoundly highlights the fact that all the capital investment you make, all the genetic progress you achieve through careful breeding and management, all the optimization of nutrition and management systems, it's all built upon a fundamental foundation of reliable, skilled labor.
Right. And if that foundation crumbles, as the article suggests it could under current policy approaches, the entire structure, no matter how impressive or technologically advanced, is at severe risk.
And to make it clear, this isn't just, theoretical speculation. The article provides real-world examples of specific enforcement actions that have already occurred, illustrating precisely how this threat manifests on the ground.
It cites incidents like the one that happened at a dairy farm in Berkshire, Vermont back in 2018, where ICE detained 8 workers.
8 workers.
Yeah. Migrant Justice, an organization working with dairy workers, described it as the largest single immigration enforcement action against farm workers in Vermont in recent history. Imagine the immediate, devastating disruption that caused on that specific farm.
Oh, absolutely. Losing 8 people from your team all at once, instantaneously. Who milks those cows that night? Who preps the parlor?
The operational chaos is immediate.
And another example cited is in Sackett's Harbor, New York, where ICE picked up 4 adults and 3 children at a dairy operation in 2020. Again, the article emphasizes this as part of what the agency called enhanced targeted operations.
Right. And while there's obviously a huge human element and impact on families in every situation like this, the article focuses squarely on the operational impact on the farm itself, the sudden removal of essential workers from critical roles.
Let's break down, as the article does, what this kind of loss means for a hypothetical, but probably very real, dairy operation.
Okay.
It uses a 500 cow example, maybe 1 pushing limits, averaging 75 pounds per cow per day with excellent components like 4.44% butter fat,
Numbers. Yeah.
generating approximately $315,000 in monthly milk revenue at, current-ish pricing levels.
Yeah.
According to the article, losing even 50% of your milking staff, not the whole team, just half,
Half the crew.
doesn't just linearly cut your production by 50%. It catastrophically disrupts your entire operational rhythm.
Catastrophically. That's a powerful word choice, but likely accurate in that scenario.
And the article goes on to detail the specific practical disruptions that occur. Maintaining proper milking intervals, for instance.
Absolutely critical.
Crucial for udder health, preventing mastitis, ensuring consistent milk flow and production volume. If your crew is halved, those 12-hour or maybe 10-hour intervals become impossible to maintain consistently.
Leads to cow stress, health issues, lost milk.
Exactly. It also impacts executing precision feeding protocols, tying right back to those DMI and ME levels we talked about.
Yeah. If you can't deliver feed bunks correctly, or push up feed often enough, or manage group changes properly because you just don't have the people.
All that nutritional fine-tuning just goes out the window.
Precisely. The complexity of modern dairy management relies on the consistent, timely execution of highly specific tasks performed by skilled individuals. A sudden, drastic reduction in your trained workforce means that carefully optimized protocols for milking, feeding, cow handling, health monitoring, they just fall apart.
And the consequences aren't minor inefficiencies. They are immediate and severe impacts on cow well-being, milk quality, production volume, and ultimately, your bottom line.
The article also reinforces these points with national and state-level data, reiterating those initial numbers from Texas A&M University Center for North American Studies.
Those big ones.
The 79% of milk produced by dairies employing immigrant labor, and 51% of the total dairy labor force nationwide being immigrant.
These aren't just statistics. They are the dominant figures that define the reality of labor on most commercial dairy farms in the U.S. today.
And bringing it down to a state level, Rick Narabout, who is the CEO of the Idaho Dairymen's Association, provides powerful context.
Yeah, what did he say?
He estimates that about 90% of workers on Idaho dairy farms specifically come from other countries.
90% in Idaho.
Yeah. Idaho is a major dairy state, so this figure adds significant geographic weight to the national picture, showing just how deeply embedded and essential this workforce is in major production areas. It's not just a national average, it's a localized reality for many.
And the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Workers study cited in the article as another crucial, maybe uncomfortable layer to this reality, finding that somewhere between 46% and 70% of immigrant dairy workers are currently undocumented.
And this statistic is absolutely key to understanding the depth of the crisis and the vulnerability the article highlights.
Why is that?
Because it means that a very large portion of this essential workforce, the people milking your cows, feeding your herd, maintaining your equipment, are particularly vulnerable to enforcement actions.
Ah, right.
Their legal status, or lack thereof, is the direct link between federal immigration policy and the fundamental stability of your farm's labor force. It creates a direct pathway for political decisions to translate into immediate operational risk.
So, to summarize this foundational section, the article concludes by reinforcing, with stark clarity, that most dairy operations face immediate operational collapse if enforcement proceeds at current rates.
It's a powerful and uncomfortable warning, isn't it?
It is. And it defines immediate operational collapse not just as, reduced profits or tighter margins.
No, it's more fundamental.
But as potentially being unable to continue the core non-negotiable functions of the farm, like milking the herd twice a day, every single day.
Yes, the article's definition of collapse gets right to the heart of it. It's the inability to perform those essential, time-sensitive tasks consistently and correctly, the very tasks that maintain herd health, production, and milk quality.
If you can't milk your cows on schedule every day, you're not just less profitable.
You're facing a cascade of animal welfare issues and potential cessation of operations. It's an existential threat.
Now, the article moves to underscore these points with the hard economic numbers, diving deep into the staggering projections of what this labor loss would mean for the entire dairy economy, not just individual farms.
It reiterates those national data points we just discussed from Texas A&M, the 79% of milk from dairies with immigrant labor, the 51% immigrant dairy labor force. These are the figures that provide the baseline for the economic modeling.
And again, the Idaho example from Rick Nairbout, 90% of workers from other countries on those dairies, just solidifies that these percentages aren't uniform, but are incredibly high in key production states.
And the University of Wisconsin-Madison study's finding of 46-70% of immigrant workers being undocumented is central to why the economic projections are so dire.
Because that defines the pool at risk.
Exactly. It defines the pool of workers most directly exposed to enforcement risk.
Right. So the article uses these baseline figures to launch into this massive economic analysis derived from Texas A&M University using the in-plan model.
Which is a pretty standard tool for this kind of economic impact study.
For those maybe unfamiliar, the in-plan model is essentially a sophisticated economic simulation tool. Researchers input changes, like a reduction in a specific labor force within an industry.
Right.
And the model helps trace how that change ripples throughout the entire economy, impacting related industries, jobs, wages, overall output.
And the article presents these numbers derived from the model with mathematical precision, treating labor as a critical input, just like feed or land.
It gives us a clear baseline first.
Yeah.
The current economic contribution of the dairy industry with its current immigrant labor force
Okay, what's that look like?
totals $48.1 billion in nationwide economic activity, supporting 303,300 jobs across various sectors and generating $19.6 billion in value added to the economy.
So significant current contributions that the article argues are directly dependent on this labor pool.
Exactly. Then it models different scenarios based on losing that labor. Under a 50% reduction in immigrant labor, meaning half of that 51% workforce is gone. The article states these economic values crash significantly. Nationwide economic activity falls dramatically to $36.9 billion.
Wow, that's over $11 billion gone.
Yeah. Job support drops sharply to 235,000 positions, and the value added decreases to $15.1 billion. That's a loss of nearly 70,000 jobs just from a 50% reduction.
That's not a small dip, that's a massive contraction.
And in the scenario of complete elimination of this labor force, if virtually all immigrant dairy workers were removed,
Which is the extreme scenario, but
the figures plummet even further. Economic activity collapses to $25.7 billion. Only 168,100 jobs are supported, and the value added shrinks to $10.5 billion.
so we're talking about a total loss of over $22 billion in economic activity and over 130,000 jobs compared to the baseline. The scale of the economic loss depicted by this model is truly staggering and far-reaching.
The article brings this massive economic impact back down to the farm level using another relatable analogy, connecting the macro numbers to your feed program.
Yeah, I like this one. It says, think of it as developing the perfect total mixed ration, TMR, for peak metabolizable energy, ME levels.
Spending all that time, expertise, money, getting it just right.
Then discovering that your feed mixer operator might disappear tomorrow.
It's such a perfect way to capture the fundamental disconnect the industry often faces, isn't it?
It really is. You can optimize every physical input, every biological process, but if you don't have the reliable human labor to execute the most basic tasks, like running the equipment to deliver that TMR, all that optimization is, well, academic.
The article's point is crystal clear here. You can invest in the best genetics, fine-tune your nutrition program down to the last gram of protein, implement the most sophisticated management systems, invest heavily in cutting-edge technology.
All the things smart producers do.
But all of those sophisticated, expensive investments become effectively worthless, stranded assets if you don't have the skilled workers required to execute the precision protocols day in and day out.
The human element is presented as the non-negotiable foundation for everything else.
The article details other staggering projections based on broader research that support this economic picture. It suggests that eliminating immigrant labor could reduce the U.S. dairy herd by a massive 2.1 million cows.
2.1 million cows. Think about the scale of that reduction that's potentially losing the equivalent of the entire dairy populations of several major dairy states combined.
And correspondingly, slash national milk production by a projected 48.4 billion pounds annually.
Which is huge. What's the total U.S. production, roughly?
Currently around 230 billion pounds. So 48.4 billion pounds is roughly a quarter to a fifth of the entire national supply, just vanishing from the market, according to these projections.
That would fundamentally reshape the dairy landscape. Prices would. Well, that 90% figure starts to seem less theoretical.
Exactly. It also projects forcing 7,011 dairy farms completely out of business.
Over 7,000 farms. That's a huge number of operations. That's families, communities.
Generations, often. Immense disruption to rural communities that rely on these businesses, and a significant restructuring of the entire U.S. dairy industry, potentially consolidating production onto far fewer, larger farms that might somehow manage to adapt or weather the storm.
And the economic ripple effects don't stop at the farm gate, do they?
No, they extend far beyond, across the entire agricultural supply chain that supports dairy and is supported by dairy. The article mentions a projected $32.1 billion reduction in output across that entire supply chain.
And a corresponding loss of 208,208 jobs across that same supply chain.
Wow. So jobs in feed mills, vet supply companies, equipment manufacturers, transport, processing plants, distributors, retail.
The whole network. This crisis isn't confined to the milking parlor. Its economic impact is felt across the vast network connected to dairy.
Broader economic research cited in the article suggests that mass deportations across the economy, of which agricultural labor is a significant part, could reduce overall U.S. GDP by anywhere from 2.6% to a staggering 6.2% over the next decade.
That's huge for the whole country's economy.
With agriculture specifically facing projected annual losses of $60 billion across all sectors.
And the article highlights that states with large immigrant populations and significant agricultural sectors, specifically mentioning California, Texas, and Florida,
The key dairy states.
which are also key dairy production regions, would likely face the most severe and immediate economic impacts from such labor disruptions. So the crisis would hit hardest precisely where milk production is most concentrated.
The article also includes a finding that might be uncomfortable or counterintuitive for some, referencing historical data from previous large-scale deportation campaigns.
What does it say about those?
It states that these previous campaigns, contrary to some assumptions, didn't increase wages or job opportunities for U.S.-born workers in the sectors affected.
Interesting. So it didn't help native-born workers.
In fact, instead of boosting wages and employment for native-born workers, as some might assume, such actions, according to the historical data presented, actually lowered wages and contributed to job losses overall.
Lowered wages.
And it cites a specific statistic to illustrate this point. Removing an estimated 500,000 immigrants from the labor market could potentially lead to 44,000 fewer jobs for U.S.-born workers across the economy.
Fewer jobs for U.S. workers? That does seem counterintuitive.
It directly challenges a common assumption about the economic effects of removing immigrant labor. It's a crucial, if potentially controversial, point from the article that warrants careful consideration, presented here impartially as a finding within the source material. It suggests a much more complex economic reality than just simply replacing one worker with another.
Which brings us neatly to the idea that technology, the precision agriculture revolution we discussed earlier, is going to be the silver bullet that solves this labor challenge.
Right, just automate everything.
Essentially allowing farms to operate with far fewer people.
The article acknowledges the incredible advancements in precision ag within dairy. We see it everywhere now. Automated milking systems, AMS, sophisticated activity monitoring collars providing real-time data on health and heat.
Advanced real-time data analytics platforms, guiding everything from individual cow nutrition to predictive health interventions.
Absolutely. These technologies have definitely been instrumental in enabling things like higher component percentages, pushing butterfat to 4.40% and beyond, and driving significant efficiency gains.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There is. The article delivers a crucial reality check here, describing it as the uncomfortable truth that industry leaders and policymakers sometimes refuse to acknowledge.
And what's that truth?
Even the most sophisticated, technologically advanced dairy operations, the article argues, remain fundamentally dependent on human expertise and skill to function effectively.
So tech doesn't eliminate the need for smart people.
And it's quite clear and firm about this. This essential expertise, the nuanced understanding of cows, equipment, complex systems, it can't simply be automated away with the push of a button.
It uses the AMS example to illustrate this point vividly, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Even installing a multi-million-dollar robotic milking system setup doesn't eliminate the need for skilled workers. It changes the type of skills needed.
Right. You still need highly competent technicians for routine maintenance, for troubleshooting when things inevitably go wrong,
Which they do.
and for monitoring herd health signals that the robots might flag but require human interpretation and intervention.
The article uses a very relatable scenario for any farmer, needing experienced workers at 3 a.m. during peak lactation when one of your critical AMS units goes down.
Yep. Been there, done that feeling.
In that moment, you don't just need someone who can follow a basic checklist. You need experienced workers who understand both the complex technology involved and cow behavior.
And can work under pressure.
Who can quickly diagnose the problem and get the system back up and running. You can't simply hire someone off Craigslist with no dairy or technical experience to handle that kind of high-pressure situation.
No way. The article also connects the significant cost of technology directly to the labor issue. A robotic installation is a massive capital investment.
It's huge. Potentially $150,000 to $275,000 per robot unit, plus substantial infrastructure upgrades.
And the crucial point the article makes is that for operations already struggling with volatile milk prices, thin margins, and labor instability,
Which is a lot of operations.
these massive capital investments require a stable, skilled workforce not only to operate the technology, but to justify the significant return on investment, ROI.
Right. Downtime caused by lack of skilled labor to fix a robot is lost milk, lost revenue, directly impacting that ROI calculation.
Then research confirms this point, according to a specific study cited in the article. It found that farms implementing AMS actually maintained essentially the same total number of employees after the installation as they had before.
That's a critical detail that really flies in the face of the tech replaces workers assumption, doesn't it?
It does. The jobs changed roles, becoming less physically demanding in some aspects, but often demanding higher skilled workers capable of managing complex computer systems, data analytics, and sophisticated equipment maintenance.
Which leads to the article's conclusion on this point. The assumption that automation fundamentally reduces overall labor needs in dairy is presented as flawed.
Right. Rather than eliminating the need for people, it changes the nature of the requirements, demanding a different type of skilled labor, often a higher level of technical and analytical skill.
So if technology isn't the universal silver bullet, what about the H2A program? It's often pointed to by policymakers and, industry stakeholders as the existing solution for agricultural labor shortages.
And the article acknowledges the program's significant growth, highlighting its expansion from issuing just 44 visas in 1987 to approving over 378,000 temporary positions in fiscal year 2023.
On paper, that sounds like a robust system providing a large pool of workers.
It does. But the article meticulously explains why it fundamentally fails to address dairy's core labor needs, citing USDA data on the program's structure.
What's the core problem?
The core insurmountable problem, according to the article, is that H2A is designed for temporary or seasonal labor requirements.
See.
Yeah. The average certification duration for an H2A job in fiscal 2023 was only 5.75 months.
Just under 6 months.
The fundamental mismatch for dairy is glaringly obvious. Cows need milking 365 days a year, twice daily, without any seasonal breaks or downtime.
Right. Dairy's essential labor needs are year-round, non-seasonal, continuous.
The H2A program in its current form simply is not built for that reality.
And the cost implications of using H2A for year-round work, even if it were somehow structured differently, are significant, and the article argues probably prohibitive for dairy margins.
He references analysis from Michigan State University economist Zach Rutledge.
What did he find?
He estimates that while domestic workers might cost $15–25 per hour, including payroll taxes, H2A workers can cost almost twice as much, in the range of $25–30 per hour.
Wow, nearly double.
And that $25–30 figure he notes and the article emphasizes is just the wage cost. The total cost is significantly higher when factoring in mandatory requirements like providing housing, transportation, and other expenses for H2A workers.
Which are substantial costs.
Absolutely. For dairy operations already running on razor-thin margins, facing volatile milk prices, that represents a substantial, potentially unsustainable financial burden for their core labor needs.
The article mentions the National Milk Producers Federation, NMPF, lobbying efforts to try and expand H2A access for year-round dairy operations.
They've been working on this for years.
Highlighting a persistent frustration and, frankly, an irony. Even sectors like sheep herding, another year-round animal ag enterprise, have somehow gained access to H2A for their core continuous labor needs.
But not dairy.
But dairy, a multi-billion-dollar industry foundational to the U.S. food supply, still does not have H2A access for its essential year-round milking and herd management labor.
And despite years of effort and advocacy, the article states the persistent reality clearly. Dairy farms currently do not have access to the H2A farm worker program for their essential non-seasonal labor needs.
So it remains a program fundamentally unsuited and unavailable for the core workforce required to milk cows every day of the year.
Pretty much. The bottom line on H2A, according to the article's analysis, is that while it might serve its purpose for seasonal fruit and vegetable crops with defined harvest periods and potentially higher margins per acre,
right,
it is presented as economically devastating and practically impossible for dairy operations that have thin margins and non-negotiable year-round labor requirements.
And it's not just the year-round aspect, is it? It's the skills, too.
Exactly. The specialized skills required for dairy work, handling large animals safely, operating complex milking equipment, identifying subtle signs of illness, understanding feeding protocols. These aren't skills quickly acquired by a temporary workforce rotating every 6 months.
Dairy requires experienced people.
And H2A is just not built for long-term skilled employee retention in that context.
The article then shifts gears a bit, moving from problem analysis to what it calls smart producers are already adapting.
Okay, so what are they doing?
The point here is that forward-thinking, resilient operations aren't sitting back, passively waiting for Washington to suddenly pass perfect legislation.
Because that could be a long wait.
They are proactively taking action on their own farms, implementing strategies to build resilience against this ongoing crisis.
And the article suggests that these proactive strategies are what will ultimately separate the survivors from casualties as the labor crisis deepens.
Hoping for a policy fix isn't a viable operational plan, basically.
Right. So what's strategy one?
The first major strategy detailed is comprehensive worker retention and development programs. This goes way beyond just paying a wage.
Okay, like what?
What these programs include, according to the article, are addressing workers' long-term needs and well-being through tangible support systems. This can involve providing or assisting with access to healthcare,
Which is huge.
offering housing assistance or high-quality on-farm housing, providing English language training to improve communication and integration, and creating skills development pathways within the operation to offer opportunities for advancement.
So investing in the people you have.
Exactly. The core argument presented here is that investing meaningfully in worker stability and well-being isn't just, a humanitarian concern. It's a direct investment in operational resilience.
Makes sense.
The article frames it as protecting your existing massive investments in genetics and technology and management systems. A stable, skilled workforce is what makes all those other investments actually pay off.
And the article cites a crucial statistic that powerfully backs this up.
What's that?
Research shows that dairy operations with stable workforces, farms with lower turnover rates, and more experienced staff consistently achieve significantly higher rolling herd averages, RHA, often 12% higher or more.
12% higher RHA? That's massive.
And experience dramatically lower productivity losses directly related to high employee turnover and constant retraining.
Think about what a 12% higher RHA means for your milk check. That's a clear, measurable ROI on treating your labor as a valuable long-term asset to be invested in.
Absolutely. Okay, what's strategy 2?
Strategy number 2 is meticulous I-9 compliance and audit preparation. This might sound like just paperwork, but the article highlights it as a critical defense against immediate operational disruption.
Right, because those audits can come anytime.
Penn State's Brooke Dewar is cited, strongly emphasizing the absolute necessity of having systematic, ongoing I-9 audit preparation in place now.
Not when you get the notice.
Exactly.
Right.
The critical rule from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is non-negotiable. If they arrive on your farm and request your I-9 forms, you have precisely 3 business days to produce any documents they request.
3 days. That's not much time if things aren't organized.
Not at all. And the challenging reality is that, as the article notes, ICE officers may show up unannounced or with very little prior warning, presenting a notice of inspection for your I-9 forms.
So you have to be ready constantly.
Smart operations, the article stresses, don't scramble when the notice arrives. They maintain meticulous, organized, and up-to-date employment records at all times and have already developed clear response protocols before enforcement arrives.
This preparedness protects you from potentially crippling fines, which the article summary implies can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Serious money. Okay, strategy 3.
Strategy number 3 is strategic technology integration, revisiting technology, but with a different, more nuanced focus than the simple idea of replacement.
Right, not just tech for tech's sake.
The goal here, as defined by the article and seen on successful farms, is to strategically adopt technology in ways that enhance worker productivity and efficiency, rather than solely attempting to replace workers.
Makes sense. Examples.
Examples cited include integrating precision feeding systems that reduce manual mixing errors and labor, automated health monitoring systems that free up skilled labor time from observation rounds to focus on intervention,
Letting people focus on the high-value tasks.
and data analytics platforms that empower managers and skilled workers to make better decisions faster.
These tools, the article argues, don't eliminate the need for people, but they allow existing skilled workers to manage larger herds more effectively, improve accuracy, and reduce some of the more physically demanding or repetitive labor.
So this type of technology investment complements, rather than attempts to replace, the essential skilled human labor on the farm.
Okay, and the last one, strategy 4.
Finally, strategy 4 is supply chain diversification. This involves actively reducing your operations' dependence on single suppliers who might themselves be vulnerable to labor disruptions, like those described earlier.
Looking beyond your own farm gate.
Exactly. This is about building resilience upstream and downstream. It involves diversifying your vendor networks, maybe having multiple sources for feed ingredients, working with several transportation companies, or building relationships with multiple processing facilities if possible.
Spreading the risk.
And a key factor mentioned is actively working with vendors and partners in your supply chain who themselves have demonstrated stable labor practices.
Why is that important?
By collaborating with businesses that value and retain their workforce, you are indirectly protecting your own operation from potential supply chain disruptions caused by labor issues further up or down the chain.
Like your feed mill suddenly closing or transport becoming unavailable?
Exactly. Building a resilient network.
The article then takes a step back to look at the broader global competition angle.
Right. How does the U.S. situation stack up internationally?
It points out that while the U.S. dairy industry is grappling with this fundamental labor crisis and the uncertainty it creates, global competitors are not standing still.
They're moving ahead.
They're actively building structural advantages related to labor that position them better in the international market.
So stable, predictable labor policies in other dairy-producing countries, the article argues, are directly helping those competitors capture expanding global market share while the U.S. struggles with inconsistency and potential production losses.
And it provides specific examples. New Zealand, a major dairy exporter,
Huge player.
has well-established seasonal worker programs like their Recognized Seasonal Employer RSE scheme that provide dairy farmers with predictable, legally authorized labor pools.
So they have reliability.
This predictability, the article suggests, enables consistent 2-3% annual production growth and supports ongoing farm modernization and investment because farmers know they'll have the workforce to utilize those investments.
Makes sense. Who else?
Canada, our neighbor to the north, and another significant dairy producer, is highlighted for its even longer track record, over 50 years of managed agricultural immigration through programs like their Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, SAWP.
50 years. That's established.
This half-century of planned, consistent labor supply supports long-term investment planning on Canadian farms and helps them avoid the volatile, unpredictable boom-bust cycles seen in the U.S. labor market.
And Europe.
Within the European Union, regional worker mobility policies effectively eliminate the kind of national-level immigration uncertainties that plague U.S. operations. Workers can move more freely within the EU to meet agricultural needs, supporting stable planning horizons for European dairy producers who are also competitors in the global market.
So the implication for U.S. market share, as the article points out, is clear.
Yeah.
When U.S. dairies face production volatility or inability to expand due to labor shortages and uncertainty, international suppliers who do have stable labor frameworks are well positioned to fill the gap in global demand, often at premium prices.
This directly impacts the competitiveness and global standing of the U.S. dairy industry. We lose out.
Potentially, yes.
The article then transitions to discussing potential policy solutions, suggesting that meaningful long-term solutions require a fundamental shift in approach.
Moving beyond just enforcement.
Moving beyond enforcement-only strategies that primarily disrupt the workforce and towards policies that address the reality of dairy's year-round labor needs. And as we noted earlier, we'll present these impartially as the solutions specifically discussed and advocated for within the article.
Right. So what's solution one?
Solution number one discussed is modernized guest worker programs. This involves reforming existing programs like H2A and developing new ones specifically tailored to meet the unique needs of year-round agricultural sectors like dairy.
So fixing H2A or creating something new for dairy is reality.
Yeah. The goals would be to accommodate continuous labor requirements, strengthen worker protections, remove those restrictive seasonal limitations that make H2A incompatible with dairy, and streamline the application process for legitimate employers to reduce administrative burden.
Okay. Solution two.
Solution number two is advocating for earned legalization for current workers. This involves providing pathways to legal status, potentially permanent residency, for the significant population of long-term undocumented workers who are already integrated into the U.S. dairy workforce.
The people already here doing the work.
The article highlights the point that these workers are integral to dairy operations, possessing years of experience and training that is not easily replaced.
And it mentions NMPF supports this.
It explicitly mentions the National Milk Producers Federation's call for permanent legal status for these workers, tying it directly back to avoiding the economic catastrophe scenario outlined by the data.
Makes sense. Solution three.
Solution number three is advocating for balanced enforcement priorities. The article notes the striking current disparity in federal spending, citing a rough 14.1 ratio favoring immigration enforcement budgets over budgets for enforcing labor standards.
14-1. That's a big difference.
The argument presented is that this severe imbalance not only leads to disruptive immigration raids, but also, by failing to adequately enforce labor standards, can enable worker exploitation and ultimately undermine fair wages and working conditions for all agricultural workers,
including native-born workers.
Exactly. Rebalancing priorities could lead to more stable employment practices across the board.
And the last one, solution four.
Solution number four is exploring the potential for regional labor compacts. This suggests developing agreements, potentially between states or regions, that could facilitate managed seasonal or year-round worker mobility across different agricultural sectors and geographic areas based on need.
So more flexibility across state lines, maybe.
Yeah. The goal would be to reduce some of the administrative complexities of national programs while maintaining necessary oversight and ensuring robust worker protections are in place.
Okay, so those are the policy ideas discussed.
The article's core message really culminates in a section titled Adapt or Perish, revisiting the stark choice facing dairy producers in light of the data and the policy challenges.
Bringing it all together.
It brings the conversation full circle back to that seemingly unbelievable 90.4% milk price increase projection.
Yeah, that number again.
Hammering home the point that it's not a theoretical fantasy or political hyperbole, it's presented as the direct mathematical result of removing the immigrant workforce that currently produces 79% of U.S. milk.
The economics presented earlier, the loss of production in farms, mathematically leads to extreme scarcity scenarios in the market, driving prices up drastically.
In connecting it back to your operation, the article reinforces that all that genetic progress you've painstakingly built, all the component optimization you've achieved, pushing butterfat to 4.40%.
All the tech investment, the rotary parlors, the AMS units, the activity monitors.
All of it becomes vulnerable, potentially worthless, without the skilled workers needed to execute the daily protocols, to milk the cows correctly, to feed them precisely, to manage the machines, and to care for the animals.
Labor underpins everything else.
The article then poses 4 critical questions directly to you, the listener, suggesting that your answers determine your readiness for the unfolding crisis.
Okay, what are they?
The first is sharp and immediate. Can your operation realistically survive a 50% labor loss occurring within just 30 days?
Wow. And the article doesn't leave that question hanging, does it? It immediately provides the answer based on the Texas A&M research.
Which says,
the data suggests most dairy operations, in their current structure, cannot survive that kind of sudden, drastic workforce reduction. It highlights the immediate existential vulnerability.
Okay, tough first question. Question 2.
Are your technology investments truly labor-dependent or labor-independent?
Digging into that tech piece again.
The article states that an honest assessment here is crucial for determining your vulnerability level, tying back to that point that much of today's sophisticated dairy tech still requires skilled human oversight and maintenance rather than operating truly autonomously.
Got it. Question 3.
Question 3 cuts directly to financial risk. What's your contingency plan if, for some reason, H2A costs were to double overnight?
Referencing Zach Rutledge's analysis that current H2A costs are already potentially double domestic wages when all expenses are included.
Right. The question forces you to consider the economic viability of relying on or being forced into such a costly program. Do you have a plan B for that?
And question 4 broadens the scope beyond the farm gate. How are you actively building political capital for fundamental immigration reform?
Getting involved.
Emphasizing the article's point that while farm-level strategies are essential, individual operators cannot solve this systemic national policy issue alone. It requires collective action and political engagement through industry organizations.
Based on these challenges, the article provides an implementation timeline for immediate action.
Concrete steps.
Outlining concrete steps a producer can, and according to the article, should take now, starting this week, to position their operation for resilience.
Okay, what's the first step? Week 1.
The very first step, recommended, within week 1 to 2. Immediately contact your state dairy association to get involved and join advocacy efforts.
Don't wait.
No. The article specifically mentions the National Milk Producers Federation and the American Farm Bureau Federation as leading national initiatives, but stresses that they need unified vocal producer support on the ground to effectively influence policy outcomes in Washington.
Makes sense. Month 1.
Month 1. Conduct a comprehensive I-9 audit of your current employment documentation.
Get those papers in order.
Reiterate Brooke Dewar's urgent guidance. You only have 3 business days to produce documents when ICE arrives for an inspection. Highlights the absolute necessity of proactive, meticulous preparation before you receive a notice.
Maybe hire someone to help.
Yeah, might involve hiring an external consultant or using resources from your industry association to ensure everything is absolutely in order.
Okay. Months 2 to 3.
Months 2 to 3. Actively develop and implement worker retention programs on your farm. Refer back to the research showing the benefits of stable workforces.
Investing in your people.
This involves dedicating resources to things like assessing housing needs, exploring healthcare access options, offering English language training, and creating pathways for skills development and advancement for your existing team.
And months 4 to 6?
Months 4 to 6. Make strategic investments in technology, focusing specifically on systems that enhance, support, and improve the productivity of your skilled workers.
Not just replace them.
Rather than technology purchased with the flawed assumption that it will simply reduce the total number of people you need. Follow the models of successful AMS integration that maintain employment levels but shift job roles towards higher skill sets.
The article concludes this section with a powerful assertion that serves as a summary of its recommended approach. The smart money in dairy is now fundamentally in operations preparation.
Operations prep, that covers a lot.
This preparation, as outlined, covers comprehensive worker retention programs, strategic and thoughtful technology investment, robust risk management, including I-9 compliance, and dedicated political engagement through established farm organizations.
It's not about passively waiting for a hypothetical policy fix. It's about actively building operational resilience on your farm today, while simultaneously advocating for the systemic change that the industry desperately needs.
So, what's your concrete, actionable next step, according to the clear direction provided in this Bullvine article?
It's presented as immediate and essential. Contact your state dairy association this week to get connected and join the ongoing advocacy efforts for agricultural labor reform.
Reaffirming why this is the crucial first step. Unified collective producer support is absolutely necessary to influence policy outcomes in Washington.
Your individual voice is important, but it is amplified exponentially when combined with the voices of thousands of other dairy farmers facing the exact same challenges.
And to leave you with a final thought, building on the article's closing lines and the stark reality it presents.
Yeah.
This isn't just about abstract politics or policy debates happening far away. It's fundamentally about protecting the future viability of your specific operation, your livelihood, your way of life.
Especially in a market where optimizing components like butter, fat, and protein and maximizing operational efficiency are absolutely key to survival.
The crisis the article describes isn't some distant possibility looming on the horizon. It's coming, or perhaps, as the article strongly suggests and recent events indicate, it's already here.
Manifesting in the daily, grinding challenges of finding, training, and keeping the skilled labor you need to milk cows 365 days a year.
Frame the choice the article presents. Will you be ready, prepared, and proactive when that political theater the article talks about translates into enforcement action that hits your milking parlor?
Potentially at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Leaving you short-handed.
The stark reality the article leaves you with is this. Washington may be engaged in complex, often unpredictable political theater, but your cows still need milking twice daily.
Every day.
Your components still need optimizing to capture market value. Your TMR needs mixing and delivering, and your entire operation needs proactive protection.
The producers who recognize this fundamental truth about their labor dependency and act accordingly, focusing on their people, their preparedness, and their collective voice through industry action are the ones who the article suggests are most likely to still be standing when the dust settles on this undeniable labor crisis.
Something definitely worth thinking about and acting upon this week.
Here's the bottom line, folks. While Washington plays political games with immigration policy, your cows still need milking twice daily, your components still need optimizing, and your operation still needs protecting. The 90.4% milk price increase we discussed isn't some distant theoretical possibility. It's the mathematical result of eliminating the workforce that produces 79% of America's milk supply. Every day that passes without policy solutions moves our industry closer to that economic cliff. The producers who recognize this fundamental truth and take action now will be the ones still standing when the dust settles. The question isn't whether this crisis will affect you. It's whether you'll be ready when it hits your milking parlor at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning. Your next step? Contact your state dairy association this week. Join the advocacy efforts for agricultural labor reform. The National Milk Producers Federation and American Farm Bureau Federation are leading these initiatives, but they need unified producer support to make real change happen. This has been the Bullvine Podcast. Remember, we don't just report the news, we give you the insights to profit from it. Until next time, keep challenging conventional wisdom and stay ahead of the curve. Visit us at www.thebullvine.com for more industry-disrupting content that separates leaders from followers. Thanks for listening.